So, welcome, a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us today. My name's Bhante Akaliko. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a cis, queer Buddhist monk. And I'm also the founder of Rainbodhi LGBTQIA+ Buddhist community. Today, before we get started, I'd like to offer some acknowledgements. I live in a colonized country, Australia. So here it's part of our culture to, at the beginning of every public event, acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. So today I'm coming to you from Barramadigal land of the Darug Nation. So this was, and always will be Aboriginal land. This land was never ceded. We acknowledge that we have a complicated relationship with this place and with the traditional owners of this land. So I pay my respects to our First Nations elders, past, present, and future. And I extend that respect to all First Nations people everywhere. Another acknowledgement I'd like to make is that this week we celebrate the 12th International Trans Day of Visibility. So I'd like to acknowledge that in this country here in Australia, we have First Nations people who are gender diverse, known as sister girls and brother boys. And that these people have a long history in Australia, way before colonisation. And I'd like to also acknowledge First Nations and other gender diverse people all around the world who have been persisting in face of colonialism and religion, such as the Hijira in India, the Fa'afafina in Samoa, the Katoi and Tomdi in Thailand, the Two-Spirit people in North America and Canada. And I'd just like to acknowledge also the transcestors and queer heroes of the past, people who have persisted and flourished and struggled and loved and belonged through all parts of history. There always will be trans and gender diverse people. And did you know that Buddhism has a trans and gender diverse history, going all the way back to the time of the Buddha and even beyond? And we have gender diverse people represented in our early Buddhist texts. And it's important to acknowledge that even in those times, there was some stigma and discrimination, and unfortunately that has sometimes continued up to today. We have some transcestors in Buddhism too. I'm thinking especially today of Michael Dillon. Michael was the first person in the West to undergo medically assisted transition, and also the first person who was a Western person who was ordained in the Himalayan tradition as a monk. And I'd also like to acknowledge those people who have fought for our rights, our human rights in more recent history, such as Marsha P. Johnson, who was part of the Stonewall leadership and a wonderful community leader, a Black trans woman. And also acknowledge here in Sydney, Australia, our queeros and transcestors from the 78ers, a group of people who started protesting in 1978, and this became Sydney's annual Pride Festival. So these are just a few acknowledgements of country, of important people in our community, our trans and gender diverse community. And to finish up, I'd just like to say welcome to you all and to thank you for being here. So Rainbodhi LGBTQIA+ Buddhist community is a spiritual friendship group started here in Australia and now making friends with people all around the world. So we offer Dharma discussion, meditation, online sessions, social activities, and we also advocate for more inclusion in our Buddhist communities. We welcome everyone, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexuality, ability, regardless of wealth or no wealth. All our events are free. And we also welcome people of all faiths or no faiths. So the important thing I want you to take away from this long introduction is that whoever you are welcome and you belong. You're accepted and loved just as you are. And thank you for joining Rainbodhi today. I'd like to introduce one of our Rainbodhi crew now, John, and John will give you a little bit of information and welcome our very special guest speaker. Thank you, John.
So we will hear from Lama Rod Owens, who is in Atlanta. It's about just after 6 o'clock in the evening in Atlanta. Lama Rod Owens has a blend of formal Buddhist training and life experience that gives him a unique ability to relate and connect and engage with the people around him. Lama Rod Owens invites you into the cross-section of his life as a black queer male, born and raised in the South, and heavily influenced by that church and that community. So he asks his audience to call him out on anything that he may do or say that perpetuates misogyny or racism or anything divisive. Lama Rod Owens has done and continues to do his own work every day, and it is palpable. We will see it and we will hear it when we meet Lama Rod in just a moment. And now, he doesn't claim to have all of the answers and merely possesses questions and encourages conversations so that we can find our truths. Briefly on Lama Rod Owens' training, officially recognised by the Kagyu school of the Tibetan Buddhism after receiving his teaching authorization from his root teacher, the Venerable Lama Nola Rinpoche. He completed the traditional 3-year silent retreat program at Kagyu Tibetan Choling Monastery outside of New York City, and it was during this time that he dealt with years of past pain and trauma and found forgiveness and compassion for himself and what he views as a critical step before truly being able to help others. Lama Rod Owens, I hope that introduction does you justice. It is a pleasure to have you here with us at Rainbodhi. Over to you, and we look forward to hearing from you and then coming together with some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, Bante, and thank you to the Rainbodhi community for this invitation and for this space to offer whatever it is that I do to this to you all. Of course, we had hoped to do this in person on the land in Australia. But we have, apparently there's stuff going on in the world right now, so that makes it quite difficult. But I'm really grateful also at the same time that this event has been opened up to so many people around the world. I'm really grateful also to see folks that I know joining in. I know some of you were with me last night for Love and Rage, which is a course that I teach. So you're going to get another dose, maybe, of some of the stuff that I shared last night. I'm very grateful to be here to share this space, to really offer something, a hope, which is beneficial. But yes, my name is Lama Rod. I am a tantric Buddhist teacher. I trained in Tibetan Buddhism, but I identify more as a tantric Buddhist teacher. My pronouns are he and him. And I actually live now, I've moved back to my ancestral lands here on Muskogee, Cherokee Creek land, which we call Atlanta, Georgia, which in the States is always seems to be the center of the universe for sometimes good things, recently not so good things happening in our state. And that is the complexity of the world right now. But I live here as a descendant of both enslaved Africans and the indigenous communities of this land. And so as we begin, I just honor, as we've done globally with Bhante, I honor the history and the present living work of Indigenous people here on this land as well. I'm also really happy and grateful to be talking about queerness and the Bodhisattva principle. This is part of some new work that I am beginning to kind of bring together. My next book will be an exploration of the Bodhisattva tradition in, I hope, a more contemporary format. And that exploration of the Bodhisattva tradition, I hope, will be an exploration that is inclusive, that is queer, and really linked to the work of justice. I think justice is such an important part of the Bodhisattva tradition that I don't think we often talk about or emphasize. And so I hope to do that work, in my next book, but we have work to do tonight. So I hope to, just speak a little bit about where I'm coming from, and my understanding of the queer Bodhisattva. And then, move into just, maybe some short breakout groups so that we can maybe, chat a little bit. There will be a question that, we'll be working with. And then we'll come back and we'll do a good session of questions and answers. Now, it may not be the case. It may absolutely be the case that I don't have an answer to your question, but I think it may absolutely be the case that I may just make something up tonight because I'm feeling a little campy, which I'm actually always doing that. So it's not just like I feel differently tonight. I'm just like, I'm gonna give it my best shot. Take it or leave it. As my mom would say when I was growing up, she would make food and she would be like, you can eat it or not. So much of this work around liberation is about joy and humor. And I come from a culture, I come from enslaved people and indigenous people where we met the struggle of the world with so much openness and space and community. And we met it with this work of transforming, the suffering, or rather we met the suffering by also acknowledging the joy, the happiness that came with the suffering, That joy and happiness, as we explore in Buddhism, it really comes from this expression of spaciousness. Like from space itself, we're able to experience, this joy, even in the face of so much struggle, and that's where I come from. And I'm indebted to my ancestors, who chose, many of them who chose to live their life as fully as possible and to create the causes and conditions for me as a descendant to come into this world to continue the work that they created. It's so important that we remember our ancestors. We remember our queer and trans ancestors. We remember our ancestors who didn't have the opportunity, the chance, the privilege to be themselves, to be their most authentic self, to love the people that they wanted and needed to love, the people who couldn't name themselves, the people who couldn't do that because of the danger, because of the risks, you know, and we also remember those ancestors who actually had no idea that it was possible to have certain kinds of lives. Their lives and their work and their labor is what we enjoy now. And the work that we're doing now in our lives, in the world, in our struggle to get free and to experience joy and happiness, but also to tend to the woundedness of the world, all this labor that we're doing creates the causes and conditions for our descendants to come into a different world. And if we don't do the work, then we make it harder for those coming before us. You know, I only have the language I have because someone came before me and created the language. You know, I only knew how to express myself because there were people who took risks and learned how to express themselves within immense suffering. I think it is not an over-exaggeration to say that there are people who literally died so that I could enjoy the freedom that I have now. And when I think about this kind of labor in the past that has been done in the past, I think that is an expression of the Bodhisattva tradition, you know, the spiritual saint, you know, in Buddhism. You know, this kind of sainthood, this expression that says that we all deserve to be free. Right? In the heart of the Bodhisattva tradition, as we read throughout the texts, you know, in the history of Buddhism and Dharma, is that there's this deep wish for all beings to be free. And that's a really audacious aspiration, because that also includes the people that we don't like. It also includes the people who have hurt us the most. So that this aspiration to free all beings isn't something that's like, you know, it's just like, it's not something that's fun to do on a Saturday night. You know, just sit around and say, I'm going to like develop an aspiration to free all beings, because we have to understand what that means. You know, we also have to understand that not only does that include all beings, but that includes us. I think it's so easy for us to forget ourselves in an aspiration for others to get free. We're always trying to work for others, but what are we doing for ourselves? You know, and the work of the Bodhisattva actually, it implies that as a Bodhisattva, as a person engaged on this path of spiritual sainthood, moving towards awakening, I actually have to be doing the intensive work for myself in order to share this for others, to be an agent of change and liberation for others. I can't free anyone if I'm not free, right? I can't guide anyone towards awakening if I am not engaged in the work for myself. And I don't know about you, but I have been in a relationship and I've met people who are trying to get other people free, but they haven't done the work for themselves. And what happens instead is just acts of violence over and over and over again. You know, there are Dharma teachers, Buddhist teachers, you know, all over the world, right, who have professed to be, you know, agents of liberation and teaching liberatory Dharma, but in fact have created a lot of harm instead. And we have to recognize, and we have to learn actually to recognize authentic liberatory work, you know, and then to align ourselves with beings, with authentic bodhisattvas who are doing actual liberation work. And when we talk about liberation for all beings, we're talking about all beings and all the worlds, all the realms, all the times, both form beings and formless beings. You know, We're talking about liberating everything. So much of the work that I'm moving into, which I'm excited about, is the work of indigeneity. And I've actually been studying indigenous scholars in Australia. Actually, so this is quite auspicious as well, which also kind of like, it's just, there's so many signs for me that I should come to Australia to do something, to come to the land and to teach. And quite honestly, I'll just be really real. I feel really safe with you all. I'm really only actually interested in coming to Australia because I want to ride around the desert in the big pink bus singing disco tunes and doing drag shows. Now, I realize that's not the only thing great that's come out of Australia, but Priscilla, Queen of the Desert has been important for me in my growing up. As a young queer person in the 90s, that movie was really helpful for me in helping me to understand that there are other queer people in the world who were trying to transcend suffering. But anyhow, my work, I'm trying to understand indigeneity, and what that means for us as if we identify as Dharma practitioners or Buddhists. What does being indigenous mean? What is indigeneity? I'm really interested in. And part of indigeneity means that we are reconnecting to the land. We're reconnecting to the land. If you sit with me, study me, and read my, particularly if you've read Love and Rage, I talk a lot about the land. I talk about trauma and the land, and I talk about how climate change is an expression of how we're disconnected from the body, and how our bodies are extensions of the land, and the land is an extension of the earth. And when we're in trauma, we tend to be disassociated from our bodies, and it makes it hard for us to feel connected to the land. So many of us have lost a sensitivity to the land, to the intelligence of the land, to the consciousness of the land. And when we think about indigenous expression, indigenous life, we also have to understand that the world in indigenous studies, that the world, everything is conscious. Plants are conscious, the land is conscious, phenomenal reality in general is conscious, it's energy, that we can tune into. And we have to start orienting ourselves back towards that kind of, that experience of the world being conscious, and the land being conscious, and the land wanting to take care of us. That the land wants to take care of us, but we have to return back to being sustainable with the land. And I think that's part of this kind of Bodhisattva work, is understanding how to return back to indigeneity. And sometimes I call indigeneity authenticity. How am I my most authentic self? Who am I beyond the labels and the systems and the institutions? And I think queerness is a part of this indigeneity, because queerness is actually asking us to be our most authentic self, right? How do we name ourselves in a way that feels really spacious, really fluid, really connected to community? And how does queerness become a way for us to just to embody a kind of authenticity? How does that actually become a method that we use to get others free? When I am my most authentic self, how does that trigger liberation for others around me? And I would, I think about growing up in queer community, growing up in my teens and getting into my 20s, being parts, going to spaces, queer spaces, where I was being taught by elders in that space how to be myself, how to name myself in a way that felt fluid and spacious and open. And how to name myself and how to experience that fluidity, that openness, and also practice connecting to the space that helped me to negotiate and to move through the consequences of what it meant to be my most authentic self in a world that didn't want to see me being authentic. Moving through communities and places where I was forced to be a way that was not authentic to me. And to remember that in our own practice, that all of us, in so many ways have had to fight to be healthy, or to be in a process of understanding what health and balance and stability means. But the ways that we've had to fight to name ourselves, to experience happiness. One of my favorite scenes in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, is the scene where Bernadette, where she says, I fight because I can only fight because I've had to learn to fight. She starts talking about her transition and growing up. And that's part of the work that some of us have to do. We have to fight. And sometimes we don't like talking about fighting in Dharma Buddhist communities, but some of us have never had the privilege of not fighting, to be free and to be alive. Some of us would not be alive if we didn't know how to fight. And I learned how to fight because I was Black and queer in the Southern United States, which is not the easiest place to be ever, but especially right now. And that's been part of my Bodhisattva work, is that I've had to learn how to understand how to get myself free in order to be an example of freedom for others. So the Bodhisattva in general commits themselves to the liberation of all beings. The Bodhisattva chooses to go into the places where they're needed. So the work of the Bodhisattva is not a comfortable position. It's not a comfortable expression. It is about negotiating a level of discomfort, right? To be change agents, to want to get people free, you have to meet people in their suffering. You have to be willing to meet yourself in your own suffering and discomfort, to hold space for that discomfort, to embrace the profound practices of mourning, of touching into our own sadness, touching into the contradiction, that we have to move through, holding space for that and experiencing the sadness and then letting it go. And the Bodhisattva isn't, we read, these ancient texts and Buddhism, and I've studied this. I've done graduate work in Buddhism, and I've studied this, and I was just reviewing some texts that I've written on in the past in my academic work. And it's very easy to read the Bodhisattva literature and to see Bodhisattvas as superheroes. As Bhante was asking everyone as they came into the room, what's your superhuman ability? the superhero ability. And, it's easy to read those texts and to see bodhisattvas who are just great, powerful beings who could do all kinds of things. And as I look into the bodhisattva now and how the bodhisattva manifests right now in the world, it's not that the bodhisattva can't have these great qualities and these great abilities. That's wonderful. But I think ultimately the real bodhisattva is someone who just gives a shit. Basically, it's a very low bar, but it's also a very high bar because there are a lot of people who don't care. I think the world will be a different place if more people cared about the welfare of others. But the bodhisattva is someone who is committing themselves to caring about the welfare of all beings. And we care, and that care manifests as compassion and love. Of course, compassion meaning the wish for people, for beings to be free. Love, we can say is the wish for beings to be happy. You want everyone to be free and safe and happy. But that doesn't mean that we can't want people to be held accountable for violence as well. The bodhisattva in the tradition doesn't want people to suffer more. The bodhisattva wants to disrupt suffering. But we know to disrupt suffering, we have to move into a process of accountability where people and beings in general are able to see what they're doing, to see how they're out of control and creating discomfort, suffering, and violence for others. I think that's a really difficult part of the Bodhisattva work, is to reflect, to become a mirror for people, to reflect back to people the ways in which they're out of control. That is a significant amount of emotional labor. Emotional labor means that we're noticing and experiencing what's happening for us, and we're also holding space for others to experience what they're moving through. So many systems of violence, particularly, these systems that perpetuate transphobia and queerphobia, and sex negativity and so forth, these things are perpetuated by our inability to be with our own discomfort. And instead of being with our own discomfort, we just find ourselves habitually reacting over and over again to the pain. That reactivity is really a lack of spaciousness. And if we have no space, then yes, the suffering increases, but we just continue reacting, creating more violence often. And what we're trying to do in our practice is to notice the pain, hold space for it, and that space opens when we disrupt reacting, and when that reactivity is disrupted, then we have the space to respond to the pain, not just react, to respond. And in response, there's a lot of space for discernment, for wisdom, for love and compassion to arise with that. There's not a lot of space for those qualities when we're just reacting. But I see a lot of reacting to the pain, to the discomfort, to the hurt, to the trauma, and how much violence that creates for all of us. I know that's created a lot of pain for those of us who are living on this land in Atlanta. I know a couple of you are tuning in from Atlanta, from here. And so there's so much in terms of the shootings from last week, and then our state legislature, who's reducing our rights to vote, really, all that's a reactivity to pain. A lot of that is expression of patriarchy as well, from male identified folks who are buying into a system that actually doesn't allow them to be themselves. So when we start thinking about queerness in particular, so when we bring queerness, I think the Bodhisattva is, and the tradition itself is an expression of queerness, because the Bodhisattva meets the needs of people, and you can't meet the needs of people or communities if you're not fluid. You know. And just to go back a little bit too, I want to talk a little bit about bodhicitta as well. Bodhicitta is the energy that drives the work of the Bodhisattva. We say bodhicitta is this awakened consciousness. You know, my work, I understand bodhicitta as the combining, or the conversation between wisdom and compassion coming together, you know, or clarity and care, you know, coming together. And that coming together of wisdom and compassion creates a force that drives the Bodhisattva into benefiting everyone around them. And bodhicitta, the development of bodhicitta becomes something that is irresistible. Bodhicitta is something that we can't resist. When I say irresistible, I mean that the clarity that we develop, along with the wish for people to get free, is something that we can no longer resist not getting involved in. It becomes like a river or something. It becomes like a flow that we just kind of find ourselves in, and we get swept away in this energy that's pushing us, guiding us into benefiting others. So I always say that, like, this kind of practice is dangerous, is risky, you know, because when you begin it, it's hard to stop. You know, when we engage in clarity and wisdom, it's hard to unsee what you've seen. It's hard to unknow what you begin to know. When you begin to really understand and perceive and touch into the suffering of the world, you can't just forget that. And we're compelled, bodhisattvas are compelled into the work of deep compassion, liberatory work through bodhicitta, because we begin to understand what's at stake. Because we begin to realize that there have been beings who have come to save us, who didn't have to save us, who didn't have to come and do whatever it was they did to benefit us. There are beings who are choosing to liberate us, and therefore we have an ethical mandate to be agents of change and liberation for other beings. I have to pass on what has been given to me that has helped me to experience freedom in this body. I have an ethical mandate to do so. And because of the clarity that I've developed through practice, I see much more clearly what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. So that's the bodhicitta. And so when we get into queerness, you know, and the bodhisattva, again, the bodhisattva has to be fluid, right? You know, the bodhisattva tradition is actually about disrupting. You know, we disrupt the roots of violence. We disrupt the roots that keep people stuck in these ways of being that are just perpetuating trauma, suffering, woundedness for them. That fluidity, that fluidity pushes against, and I think topples any system that is rigid and hegemonic. That fluidity challenges power structure, because that fluidity actually helps us to understand that we have agency and that we can embody a certain agency. And when we do and engage in Dharma practice, we're being reminded that I have this incredible agency to make choices about my body and how I relate to my mind and how I relate to my body. That I can choose a different way of being in my body and in my mind. And yes, there can and are always, I think, consequences to that choice. But the bottom line is I have this incredible agency to choose freedom for myself, to choose to name myself in a way that is spacious and joyful and loving. And with that, too, we're concerned with the body. I think queerness is rooted within the body. And I think this is important to also, always understand that the Buddha, when the Buddha was obtaining enlightenment, was sitting and practicing, that the Buddha realized that the body was imperative to liberation, right? The body, the union. And of course, the Buddha didn't come up with that. I mean, that's yoga, right? Yoga was already, that system of practice and philosophy was already in those communities when the Buddha, was practicing. But the Buddha just realized that for himself, and he said, oh, there's a union that has to happen, that this is more than just the mind doing whatever it wants, that there's a body here, there's a physical body, right? Right? The mind may represent the ultimate, but the physical body represents the relative. And our work is to bring both the relative and the ultimate together, and that is the work of yoga. And so returning back to the body as a vehicle for liberation is central for us. And part of that returning back to the body is also partially returning back to pleasure. For me, there's such an incredible pleasure associated with queerness, and that the world actually can be liberated through pleasure. And for me, in my tradition of Buddhism and the Tibetan tantric traditions of Buddhism, we talk about pleasure a lot. Pleasure can be used as a vehicle for freedom, because pleasure actually introduces us to the nature of our minds, to the essence of all reality. And if we use pleasure skillfully, then we begin to embody the essence of all reality, and that's freedom, in the practice. But for the queer Bodhisattva, it's returning back to pleasure and returning back to the ways in which we still have to navigate the trauma that has encapsulated our pleasure for many of us. To work through that trauma, through these profound methods, of Buddhadharma, but knowing that pleasure itself, the energy of pleasure, is this energy that can actually open the door to liberation for all beings. And I think also a part of this is our commitment to being sassy. And for some of us, sassiness is just really quite natural and quite easy. I'm one of those. I'm very sassy. For me, sassy is this way of disruption. It's like when I am sassing, of course, sassiness is I think it's a very American Southern thing, because I don't ever hear this in other parts of the world. But this sassiness, this, sometimes we call it having a bad attitude, but the sassiness is saying, it's a way that we say no. We set boundaries. We say, no, actually, no, that's not what's going to happen. That's not okay. That's not conducive to my liberation. Sassiness sparks the gay rights movement in New York in 1969, and and at Stonewall, people led by Marsha P. Johnson and Mother Riviera and many others said no. It's like, no, absolutely no. That's not where this is. We're not going to do this again tonight. You're not going to raid us. You're not going to discriminate us. You're not going to create violence for us. No, not tonight. And then you fight back. That fighting back is sassy, and then you snap and you get into the snap, right? Everyone snap. Snap with me. Not everyone's doing it. Snap. This is the. In tantric we say a mudra, this hand gesture. Hand gesture is a mudra, but it corresponds to kind of this awakened principle, of the mind. But this snap is the ultimate form of sassiness that has started movements, because the snap is a boundary that's been set. You snap it. You say no. That's sassiness and the fabulousness. Fabulousness. And I'll just say this, that like the intention is to free people, is to free ourselves and to free others. This intention is motivated by bodhicitta. So when we're engaging in pleasure and sassiness and fabulousness and all of this, the intention is to get people free, to get us free. This is an act of liberation. This isn't just having fun. This isn't just being queer and gay and whatever. It's just, this is what we need to do in the moment, to have the space to be safe and free, and to also offer that space and freedom to others in the moment. And the fabulousness is just like, it's me being myself. It's me enjoying my body, it's enjoying my pleasure, it's enjoying my community, it's enjoying who I am, learning how to be in the world, it's enjoying disrupting, that fabulousness, that I choose happiness even in the face of so much struggle. I'm choosing this. And of course, the campiness comes out as well as the queer bodhisattva moves through these things. The campiness. The campiness that says, I'm going to wear my Golden Girl shirt wherever I go. Right? That I can wear a Golden Girl shirt and give a Dharma talk to 130 people. That's campy, right? That campiness is how we disrupt the seriousness. And that seriousness is how white supremacy and patriarchy and ableism and capitalism and so many other things find their way into our spaces, find their way into our spaces and into our lives. That seriousness, we worship the seriousness, and when we're practicing campiness, we're disrupting the campy. And we're disrupting the serious. So I'm sorry, I don't want to rephrase that. Sorry. When we're practicing campiness, we're disrupting the seriousness and saying, you want me to be a certain way, I choose to be different. Because this is disarming, right? So much of this really intense bodhisattva work is the subtle work of disarming people of their intense rigidity, their seriousness, the ways in which they're hiding out from themselves. All of this is in pursuit of freedom, of liberation. But as we practice these liberatory qualities, liberatory things, we always have to honor and be aware of the emotional labor that this all adds up to be for us. You know, this is more than just fun. It's more than just being ourselves. This is emotional labor that we're doing on behalf of countless beings who may never, ever be able to name themselves and to be themselves in the way that we're doing. And for me, there's a part of that I have to mourn, that there's just going to be a lot of people around me, people that I love and know, who won't ever be able to feel safe enough to be themselves. That's part of the queer Bodhisattva's work, is to realize, to understand that, and to mourn. For me, it's so natural now, after decades of work, to be out, to be vocal, to be out and proud, and all these things that many of us are experiencing. And it's easy for me to judge other people and to say, oh, why aren't they out? Why aren't they, you know, because we're all working with different levels of trauma and woundedness. You know, and I want to respect that and to honor that. So my work is just to embody who I am, and maybe that will inspire people enough, just in the same way that there were people who inspired me to be myself. You know, the drag queens, you know, at the clubs, you know, they wouldn't have never called themselves bodhisattvas, but they were liberating me through the emotional labor that they were doing, you know, engaging in this art, which I see it also as protests, you know. The communities that I was given permission to be an ally in, particularly the transgender community early in my 20s, and the permission that they gave me to be myself. And this is all about courage. There's so much courage that's a part of the Bodhisattvas, especially a part of the queer Bodhisattva work. There's a courage that when I embody my queerness in this way, my queerness becomes an act of liberation for all beings, including myself. And sometimes that work will feel lonely and isolating, that we will have to lose things, you know, that we will have to give up relationships, we will have to leave communities. Loss is a part of the Bodhisattva tradition in general. If you're not willing to lose something, you're not ready for the work. Even if your intentions are so deep and transformative and liberatory, you will still be misunderstood. And that's something we mourn in our practice. So I wanted to just to kind of transition from here. I want us to have about 10 minutes, and just in small groups. You know, I know small groups are like some of y'all's least favorite phrase, but we're just going to have about 10 minutes in small groups. And I think this is really important just for us to just connect with one another, because these spaces can seem really alienating. Of course, this is all optional. You don't have to do it, you know, but, you know, maybe, you know, 3 or 4 people in every group, you know. And our question is just like a check-in, you know, and the question is for us to kind of briefly share on is, how am I expressing the queer bodhisattva idea? You know, we talked about, so Bhante asked the question, what's your bodhisattva ability. So what is your queer Bodhisattva ability? What are you doing to express this liberatory work where you're at? And you don't, also you don't have to identify as queer either, because there's still the work of the Bodhisattva, but like wherever you're at, I want us to just briefly share what we're doing to free ourselves and to free others.
Lama Rod, thank you. I really hope that we get to see you here in Australia sometime, and that you can fulfill your dream of screaming through the desert on top of a bus in full regalia. And thank you for your words of wisdom. I've listened to so many Dharma talks and given so many Dharma talks also, but it's very rare that I hear something that really makes me think, gosh, that's so true, that's so profound. And I really like the way that you have integrated social justice and Dharma practice in quite a revolutionary way that I think many Buddhists need to hear. So from me, a deep thank you, and also a bow and a sassy finger snap to you. And many, many blessings to you and all your community. And thank you to everyone who joined today. Have a fantastic day, night, and we look forward to welcoming you to a Rainbodhi event in the future.